On the runway, a Boeing 747 was fully ready to take off. Through the thick fog, the pilot pushed the thrust levers forward, switched on the headlights, and the aircraft had already crossed the takeoff speed. A speed from where returning back is almost impossible. But at that very moment, through the fog, a shadow began to appear. And this shadow was another Boeing 747 moving in the opposite direction on the very same runway, now just a few meters away. What happened next is difficult to even imagine. The question is, how did the situation reach this point? What was the air traffic controller doing? And what was that one small mistake that gave birth to the deadliest accident in aviation history? This tragic story took place in Spain's Canary Islands, a disaster the world remembers today as the Tenerife Airport disaster. Welcome once again to iFlare TV videos. Viewers, the story begins one day before the accident. March 26, 1977. Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, took off from Los Angeles Airport. It had to land in New York to pick up some passengers, and then its final destination was Las Palmas, a city in the Canary Islands across the Atlantic Ocean. This was a chartered flight and therefore fully booked. Most of the passengers were elderly, heading to Las Palmas to enjoy a cruise ship. Las Palmas is the capital of the Canary Islands, about 100 kilometers off the coast of Morocco and Spain's southernmost point. Because of its tropical weather, this destination is famous worldwide. But in 1977, behind the beauty of the Canary Islands, political tension was rising. A group known as MPAC was demanding independence from Spain, and to promote its campaign, this group often resorted to violence. And it was one such violent act that triggered the beginning of this deadly disaster. Pan Am Flight 1736 had picked up passengers from JFK Airport in New York and was now heading toward Las Palmas. Its cockpit crew included 56-year-old Captain Victor Grubbs, 39-year-old First Officer Robert Bragg, 46-year-old Flight Engineer George Warrens, along with 13 flight attendants and 380 passengers. Meanwhile, another aircraft was preparing for the same destination. At Amsterdam Airport in the Netherlands, KLM Flight 4805, also a Boeing 747, was getting ready to depart for Las Palmas. In its cockpit sat 50-year-old Captain Jacob Van Zanten, 42-year-old First Officer Klaas Mers, and 48-year-old Flight Engineer Willem Schroeder. On board were 11 flight attendants and 235 passengers. After boarding, KLM 4805 departed from Amsterdam. Now, both aircrafts were heading toward the Canary Islands. But at Las Palmas Airport, two men walked toward the terminal. Outside a flower shop, they left behind a bag and disappeared. That bag contained a bomb with a countdown timer. Exactly at 1 p.m., the airport's reception desk received a phone call. The caller identified himself as a member of the MPAC group and warned, "In the next 15 minutes, a bomb will explode at Las Palmas Airport." The airport staff immediately sprang into action. Within those 15 minutes, the entire airport was evacuated. And then, exactly as warned, a massive explosion shook the terminal, collapsing part of the roof. After this, all operations at Las Palmas were suspended. Flights were canceled, and incoming aircrafts were diverted elsewhere. Shortly after, KLM Flight 4805, approaching Las Palmas, was informed by air traffic control about the explosion. They were instructed to divert and land instead at Tenerife Airport, located 110 kilometers away. After a 25-minute extra flight, KLM landed at Tenerife at 1:38 p.m. At the same time, Pan Am Flight 1736 was also approaching Las Palmas, but was diverted to Tenerife as well. Now, almost every flight bound for Las Palmas was being diverted to Tenerife, the nearest available airport. Suddenly, Tenerife Airport was overcrowded. But Tenerife was a small airport in a mountainous region. At an elevation of 2,000 feet, surrounded by tall peaks, where moist Atlantic winds often turned into sudden fog. Visibility could drop to just 300 meters in seconds, then clear up to 2 kilometers the very next moment. When both Pan Am and KLM landed, visibility was still fine. But very soon, The clouds rolled in and visibility started dropping. Passengers were deboarded for refreshment. Meanwhile, KLM 4805, scheduled to return to Amsterdam, decided to refuel at Tenerife itself to avoid delays at Las Palmas. But just as refueling began, news arrived that Las Palmas Airport had reopened. Both flights reboarded their passengers. However, KLM's refueling blocked the taxiway. Tenerife Airport had only one runway, one taxiway, and one apron. With the apron full, the taxiway remained jammed. Because of KLM's refueling, Pan Am was stuck and could not taxi to the runway. When refueling finally finished at 4:45 p.m., KLM prepared to taxi out. But with the apron full, the controller instructed KLM to taxi along the runway itself to the far eastern end, turn around, and line up for takeoff. Pan Am was instructed to follow KLM on the runway, but exit via taxiway C3, because KLM will be taking off from that same runway. By now, visibility was worsening. KLM reached the end, turned around, and lined up for departure. Pan Am began taxiing too, but in the fog, they missed taxiway C3. The signs at Tenerife were poor and markings unclear, making things worse. At this moment, KLM's captain requested takeoff clearance. But here began the chain of fatal miscommunications. Because of the fog, the control tower could not see either aircraft, and Tenerife had no ground radar system. The tower began giving KLM instructions for their route after takeoff, but at no point gave them takeoff clearance. Yet, the KLM captain misunderstood. He believed clearance was given and radioed, "We are at takeoff." Whether he said "we are at takeoff" or "we are taking off" is still debated. The tower responded with "okay," but seconds later added, "Stand by for takeoff, I will call you." That critical message, however, was lost in overlapping transmissions. Because at the same time, Pan Am's crew radioed, "We are still down the runway." The overlap caused only distortion in KLM's cockpit, so the warning never reached them. Even when KLM's flight engineer reminded the captain, "But Pan Am is still on the runway," the captain replied, "Oh yes," and continued accelerating. In the fog, visibility was only 300 meters. Suddenly, Pan Am's crew saw headlights piercing the mist. At first, they thought KLM was standing still, but the next instant, they realized it was speeding toward them. They tried desperately to turn off the runway, but it was too late. KLM's right engine struck Pan Am's first-class section, ripping through. Landing gear collapsed, and the aircraft crashed down the runway, bursting into flames. Its full fuel tanks ignited into an inferno. All 248 people on board KLM were killed instantly. On Pan Am, those in first class were killed immediately. But many in economy survived long enough to escape through holes torn in the fuselage. Some jumped 20 feet to the ground. Out of 396 Pan Am passengers, only 61 survived. The thick fog delayed rescue services, and only when other aircraft on the apron reported flames did the tower realize what had happened. In total, 583 lives were lost in seconds, the deadliest accident in aviation history. Investigations analyzed both cockpit voice recorders. The chain of events became clear. The Las Palmas bombing, KLM's refueling that blocked the taxiway, Pan Am missing taxiway C3 in the fog, and finally, KLM taking off without clearance. Though multiple factors contributed, the final blame was placed on KLM's crew, who initiated takeoff without proper clearance, despite their own flight engineers' last-second warning. The Tenerife Airport disaster became a wake-up call for aviation worldwide. Afterwards, major reforms were introduced. Standardized radio phraseology, mandatory ground radar at airports, clear runway markings, and stricter cockpit communication protocols. Today, Tenerife has 2 airports. The accident site remains the northern airport, while a new southern airport was built at lower elevation, where fog rarely affects visibility. This was the tragic tale of Tenerife, the darkest day in aviation history. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like and share. Thank you for your constant support and love in the comments. See you again in the next video.